I'm Renee Richard, and today we're at St. Mary of the Assumption Catholic Church in New Orleans. This was a church built for the German community that lived here in the 1800s, mid-1800s. And I know myself included, it's hard to fathom just how much of the population here was of German descent. And so this church, many of the things that you see here, it's absolutely stunning. The windows, the statuary were all crafted in Germany and brought here. And there was a German priest that served this community, a Redemptorist priest that came here, besides serving the other ethnicities in this basic area. And that was Francis Xavier Selos, who is now known as Blessed Francis Xavier Selos. This is the site of his national shrine, as well as a museum and a welcome center. He is buried here, and we're going to explore his life today and the works that he did. Join us for this episode of Roots of Faith. Welcome to the show. I have as my guest today Father Harry Greil. Father Greil is the director of the National Shrine for Blessed Francis Xavier Selos here in New Orleans. And so we're going to be talking today about, the life of Blessed Selos. And since you're the director, tell us a little about, his early life.
All right. Well, Blessed Selos was born in Füssen, which is Bavaria, southern Germany, in 1819. Came from a big family.
Oh, okay.
As a young man, he wasn't very healthy. He was kind of sickly in the whole thing, and you didn't know. But his father, interesting enough, the family struggled a little bit. His father ended up as sacristan for the church there, Mang Selos, and so that helped give the family, church, and it gave him a way to live. But early on, he had the desire to be a priest. He said, I want to be like Francis. He was named after Francis Xavier. He wanted to be a priest like Francis Xavier. And so finally, he studied for the diocese, for a while, and then he heard about the Redemptorists in the United States. And very interesting, he didn't join the Redemptorists in Germany or where we were in Switzerland, Belgium. He got in contact with the Redemptorists in America and said, I want to be a Redemptorist.
I want to come there.
got kind of a letter of good standing and ended up coming to America.
As a seminarian, right?
As a seminarian, right. And he made his novitiate here, and he already done some theology, was ordained that same year in 1844.
And when you say here, you're talking about actually up around Baltimore, not here in New Orleans.
Not here in New Orleans,
right,
Baltimore,
for our viewers,
right. Yeah, because that's where we were in Baltimore at that time. Yeah. And so he ended up, and he served a little bit of time there, and then was transferred to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, St. Philomena's Church in 1845.
Which was a German church, right?
Which is a German church, right? That was our first really foundation. We came in 1832, and they tried to work for the Native Americans and some of the Germans. That didn't work. And finally, in 1839, they got St. Philomena's, and that gave us a stability and a place to work from.
Right. And, that time frame, folks, the United States was considered missionary territory. He wanted to be that missionary. That was, coming to America was being a missionary. And he had a long history of being an itinerary missionary, too, didn't he?
Yeah.
He served in quite a few states.
He did. Yeah, that a little later.
Eventually. Later. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened.
But initially, he was in Pittsburgh at St. Philomena's, and the pastor there happened to be another man who had come from Bohemia, Father John Newman. Now we know him as St. John Newman. And they were together about 3 years, and he talked about that. He's just a young priest then at the time, and Newman was a little more seasoned. And he said Newman was his father and confessor, and really a mentor to him.
Really had an impact on his life.
Indeed.
Those short years.
In those short years, And Selos stayed there then eventually Selos was made pastor of St. Philomena's and served until 1853. and then was transferred to St. Alphonsus in Baltimore, which is another German parish.
Okay.
All right.
Well, he was German.
He was
so-
German, yeah, and these were the immigrants. You know, he came.
Coming in.
Yeah, he was an immigrant. They were immigrants. Yeah, and he
You could relate to
came to serve them. You know, he spoke English, probably with an accent, a good German accent.
It's okay.
Yeah, which is okay. And he spoke French too. Evidently, he knew some
good.
French too.
Well, we know that history's coming, yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Now, at what point during that, or was that the time, he also served, wasn't he an instructor, like
Yeah,
prefect?
so a little,
for-
yeah, he
Okay.
had a thing at St. Alphonsus that was, I probably know, that he broke a blood vessel in his neck, and he had to was in bed for a number of days, and then eventually he was given a little thing. So they sent him down to Annapolis, Maryland, and then to make him novice master, but they switched it right away and they made him what we call prefect of students.
Okay.
We're in Cumberland, Maryland.
Okay.
And that's where then he became pastor of a parish, prefect of students, and superior of the community.
Yeah, obviously they had great visions for him as a leader
They did.
way back then.
Way back
huh?
then, yeah. And
In
he was
his early
very,
years.
yeah, he was very good, you know, with the students. He understood the American mind a little bit more. Now,
Yeah,
he
I
was
think he was-
criticized by some of the, especially the older Germans, because he wasn't strict enough. He was too gentle with these people.
But
you know.
that's what is so characteristic of him that people loved.
Yes.
You know, was that gentleness, that tenderness. That's kind of what you read so much about him, is that manner that he had.
Indeed,
in that
indeed,
spirit.
yes.
So there's
yes.
nothing wrong with that.
No, I don't think so either. Yeah, all right. And eventually, then Cumberland, I guess, it wasn't real healthy, and that was right around the time of the war between the Straits or the Civil War.
the Civil War.
Yeah, and so then they moved the students to Annapolis, Maryland, which is where the Naval Academy
Right,
is, and
exactly.
and then the novices were in Annapolis, and they moved them to Cumberland. Then the man who was novice master, he wrote to Rome about Selos and said, "This man
That leadership.
not huh?
That leadership.
Yep, he's ruining the congregation
Oh.
by being too lenient with the students and the whole thing." And this was not the provincial, this or the ones who would. They were all they were supportive of him. The general in Rome appointed a man from Europe to take his place.
Oh, goodness.
He was removed, and never a word or poor me or anything like that, which I really admire. And then after that, then he was put up what they call, was technically still superior to the community in Annapolis, but they made him head of what we call the American Mission Band,
Okay.
preaching parish missions. And that's where for 3 years he's crisscrossing. He's in New York, he's in Pennsylvania, he's out in Indiana, he's in Illinois, and Missouri.
All over
All
there.
over preaching. We'd say 2 weeks. Usually, you do 2 weeks parish mission. 1 week for the women and 1 week for the men.
Okay.
Yeah, but preaching. Now he didn't preach a lot of what we call the great sermons. I mean, that would be the guy who would preach for an hour. I'm on the four. Death, judgment, heaven, and hell.
Oh, goodness. I've never heard that term. That's
Yes,
a new one.
the four, but he would give the instructions very often and hear the confessions. Now, the confessions, he would be probably the first one in and the last one out of the confessional. People just lined up all over the place to go to confession to him because he obviously had a gift, for that way. So he did that for about 3 years, and then was stationed in Detroit at St. Mary's for just about a year. But even during that time, he was preaching a couple of parish missions and doing things. Then he, and it's a little hard to say, I think it looked like more he volunteered, or the superior was looking for somebody to come to New Orleans. Now, in those days, being stationed in New Orleans could almost be like a death sentence.
It is. Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Let's take a break right there, and we're going to come
Okay.
back and visit that.
All right.
On break, we were just talking about, Blessed Francis, about the superiors talking about someone to come to New Orleans,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And was that a voluntary thing? They didn't
Well,
send
it
him,
w-
right?
Well, they would send him, but they wouldn't send you if you didn't want to go
Oh,
or
okay.
were
Well,
willing
that's
to go, because it was like a death sentence
Yeah.
almost in those days because of the yellow fever.
There was so much of it here.
Yes, yeah, and he even said, he was on the train coming down, and he said, "Well, I'm finally going to the South. He liked it. He said, I've been in almost every house in the, what we'd call the province at that time. And he said,
Yeah,
but not New Orleans. Yeah,
so many states up there, too. I
Yes.
mean, he had covered the whole Northeast.
He had, So finally, and he was happy to come to the warm South, he thought. And he said,
Well, that's good.
and that'll be he says, I will die there, And he told, he met a sister. A sister was on the same train coming south with him, and he kind of predicted that he wouldn't be here too long. Wow. He was going to die.
Now he didn't. Did he come alone, or were there some others that came around that time frame?
No, he was alone as far as
at that time.
Yeah,
at that
he was
time,
just
but
by
there were
himself.
others here.
But they were moving people in and out,
From here.
From here.
And there's a
Yeah,
reason for
from
that.
New Orleans. Oh yeah.
Tell us a little bit about this unique parish that he was being sent to.
Underneath probably here. This is a unique situation. We're in St. Mary's Church, which was the German church. St. Mary of the Assumption was the German church. Just across the street.
Literally across the street.
Is St. Alphonsus Church, which was the Irish church. About a block or so down that way on Jackson was another church, Notre Dame de Bon Secours, which was a French church. So you had three ethnic churches served by one parish by the Redemptorist here.
That's it.
Now, if the German was the head of the community, the Germans felt favored. If an Irishman was head of the community, the Irish felt favored. And the Germans felt slighted.
Situation.
No, and you can read between the lines, because Selos he had a gentle spirit and the whole thing. One of the reasons he was sent down here was because the Germans and the Irish, I think in the community, the Redemptors, were not getting along so well.
Okay.
And he was a peaceable person, and they said he would be good for the community.
And he was known for that. He was
Yes.
always calm.
Yeah.
Everything I've read about him indicated, he was very good with communicating with people too, and the women, the poor. I mean, there was no distinction with who felt bonded to him by this holy spiritual man.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, he has a thing. We're working on a life of his, and we call it with all gentleness, a life of Blessed Francis Xavier Selos, because he said he would tell the people in the pulpit when he was preaching missions, if I don't receive you with all gentleness when you come to confession, basically you can publicly call me to task.
Oh, goodness.
Which is wonderful,
But
What he did, huh?
Yeah, but he was a fantastic confessor. I mean, that's what he was known for. And people would just flock to him.
Indeed, they would, yeah. So, so going back to the story, so Father Duffy was the superior of the community, and he was a great promoter of St. Alphonsus. So, and then Selos became what we call the prefect, kind of the pastor for the German-speaking here. And they took to him, and they loved him, and he loved them, And it was just it was a wonderful thing, And then yellow fever came, the second, in 1867 when he was here. Now, see, he came in 66, just after the Civil War, so New Orleans wasn't in great shape in those days. Yeah, and it was a difficult time, And they had dedicated, which is a fascinating thing, the day they dedicated St. Alphonsus in 1858, that big church, they laid the cornerstone for this church of St. Mary of the Assumption. The Germans were not to be outdone by the Irish. So look.
Well, I bet that was an interesting time for the Redemptorists here.
Oh, I think so.
Settling, putting out little fires here and there among these fiery New Orleans, especially with the Irish and their little tempers. That's interesting life.
Oh, yeah.
Here.
Oh, it was. So, and there's another little thing that I read across, something like that. Because of the times and those times, that very often they were like what we call modern credit unions, especially the women. Maybe they're doing the laundry or something like that, the Irish one, and I suspect the Germans too. They would deposit their 25 or 50 cents with the priest.
Oh, no.
At the rectory, and they would
For safekeeping?
For safekeeping. They didn't trust the banks. And then when they saved enough, maybe buy a new skillet or a pot or a pan, they come and withdraw their money.
Oh, my goodness.
As a little, I call it a little.
That's wild.
A forerunner of a credit union that were popular for a while. And
I guess they felt safe too. Y'all weren't going to
rob them of them to take their money and rob them of their money. But it was just a delightful thing. But the yellow fever came with Selos, and they were working there. They had a slate thing in the rectory, and they would just list the things, and a priest would take 4 or 5 of them and go out tromping, and all they could do was just keep, anointing people, preparing them
Yeah,
for
they-
death or blessing them after. Huh?
They were going into the homes with
Right,
this.
right. Yeah.
And you have to remember, folks, too, when yellow fever came through, if say it decimated a family, they would burn, like, they didn't know what was causing it then.
Yeah.
They would, all their possessions and stuff, they would either bury it or burn it
Yeah.
so that it wasn't contaminated. So, you know, little did they know it was bloodborne, but I mean,
Right.
you know, your priests are going in, I'm sure the
Yeah.
fear,
Oh, yeah.
because they, you know, they
That's a
were in the room with them, but, I mean, that's God's calling, and obviously he was called to do that.
Yes. So that's what he was doing right up until a couple of days before. They said, "You don't look good." And he said, "Oh no, you know, I'm trying to be fine." And he probably had already started it.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that I always thought, you know, if you got it, you died. That wasn't true.
Some people survived.
A lot of people survived, you know, and that's the way they figured initially. They said, well, it's a mild case. He'll be all right in a little bit of time. But that wasn't to happen. Yeah, so he died on, they actually know died on October the 4th, 1867 at 10 minutes to 6 in the evening.
Wow. To that exact time.
Yeah.
Now, he was young,
He was 48.
48. Okay, I
Yeah,
thought he was
yeah.
even younger than that.
Yeah, yeah.
So he had served a while
Yeah, sort of
before,
while.
because he didn't serve
Yeah.
here very long.
No, just that year plus, yeah. But yeah, he was 48 years old, you know, huh? And he died. And then in those days, of course, they buried him. They would have the funeral, died that evening. Word went out, they tolled the bell. And supposedly it was almost like a hurricane, but they laid the body out here in the church, and people started coming all night long.
Oh, wow.
And then they had the funeral mass the next morning at 8 o'clock, and the church was filled. You know, and which is now I find this interesting. This was a German church, but Father, I think it was Giesen, big, huge Redemptorist, gave the funeral talk, or we'd say homily today, but
yeah.
in English
Oh,
because of the number of people. Now, which is interesting, because Giesen would have been one of the big German ones. He
ones.
spoke in English because of the people, which meant that a lot of the people were English speaking
speakers.
that came, which is, yeah. Then they took the body around the church, and people were had to keep them from clawing at it, you know, and the whole thing, and touching rosaries, and, you know, trying to think, and buried him. Then he wanted to be buried. There's a statue in the where the shrine is of the Blessed Mother. He had blessed that the previous July, and he said, "When I die, I want to be buried underneath that statue."
Wow.
And that would have been, the altar would have been there where
The
the
side
door,
altar,
the side altar
right.
was, and he was buried over there underneath the statue.
we were just talking about the fact that he wanted to be buried under the statue of our Blessed Mother, which would have been on the side altar here, and that he was, but he didn't stay there, correct?
he didn't,
There's-
yeah.
It's been
He's moved
Other
a few.
places.
He's moved,
He's
yeah,
moved a few times.
That's in his life. He moved. So during his day, no, he was there for the longest while, and people would come and they would light candles and they would pray, you know, and
To him
leave
then.
flowers during that time. But eventually, when this church, St. Mary's, was damaged, I think maybe in the 50s or so by Hurricane Betsy.
Betsy in the 60s.
In the 60s.
Okay, 60s.
So they decided not to use this church anymore. They didn't have the money to repair it, so they moved it. So they disinterred Selos. They were going to use St. Alphonsus, so they
Right
took him
across the
across the
street,
street,
across the
and
street
took him over to
to
the
the
Irish,
English-
to the
Irish church.
Irish English church, and he was there. And then eventually they redid this church
beautiful.
after it was named a National Historical Landmark, thanks to Pat Nixon in part. We had visited and said, "Oh, this is
Really?
a magnificent church."
That's awesome.
Because they talked about tearing it down because
Oh, my goodness.
they didn't need it, you know. Anyway, so then after they fixed this up, then they brought Selos back and they buried him then in the sanctuary. So there's a slab there that has his name. He was buried there. Then as the process went towards his beatification, they had to disinter him again and basically look at all the bones and everything and, you know, and do the thing. And then eventually we made the reliquary in the shrine back there. So that's
his final, and the
that's his final.
statues there with him, right?
And the statues there, yeah.
Statues there with him.
Yes,
So-
yeah. So it's, he moved a little bit, but he was, an interesting point too, buried in the sanctuary
Sanctuary.
next to him was a brother Wenceslaus Newman, who was the blood brother of St. John Newman. So as Selos began his life with St. John Newman, he ended his life with brother Wenceslaus Newman
Oh, wow.
here. So,
Yep, side by side.
Yeah. but Selos was known, even in life, and there were people that attributed him to healings during their life. The story I like it was when he was in Pittsburgh, and some guy, and they thought he was a little strange, but he came on crutches, and he told Selos, "You have to pray for me." And he threw the crutches out the window and said,
Oh,
"I'm
wow.
not leaving until you heal me or cure me." The guy walked out.
Oh, wow.
I guess
Okay.
picked up his crutches, But he was known, he played it low key though. He didn't.
But
want,
most saints, you see
he
that,
didn't want
so.
that attention at all. It was all was God's work, and it happened. It happens here, probably on a, I don't want to say a daily basis, but people have found healing, and they find hope, and if nothing else, I think a lot of them just say, well, whatever God
Comfort,
wants.
that's it.
Comfort.
Comfort.
Yeah. It just, and that's, we all hope if we get to that stage where we can do that ourselves, huh? So,
Yes.
yeah.
We were just talking about the everyday miracles that he experienced, people experienced with him. But tell us about the official one that you have to have.
Right,
Tell us a little
yeah.
about that.
For beatification, you need a real, what we call big miracle, a certified miracle. And the one for Selos was Angela Boudreau. She was diagnosed, I think it was either liver or pancreatic cancer here at the hospital. She was a young mother, had small children. She came and prayed at the shrine here at the tomb of Selos, put her faith in him, and went home, and eventually she was cured.
Wow.
Without any medical intervention.
Yes, because those are very dangerous. I'm a nurse by
Yes.
profession, so those are very dangerous cancers. Yes.
They are, yeah. And the doctor, so they had to document it. And the doctor, one of the doctors, Dr. Wellbacher, David Wellbacher, his wife, Alma volunteers here, but he was one of the doctors that certified it. They had no
Wow.
explanation for it.
Yes, whatsoever. How awesome.
Yeah, and she lived to see her grandchildren, and she was there at the beatification in 2000.
Oh, wow,
Which
she
is
was able to go.
which is awesome.
Well,
Yeah.
Speaking of the beatification,
Yeah.
his
The portrait,
Tell
yes,
us a little
tell
bit
it.
about the
It's
official, what's different about his.
Yeah. Well, his, it captures his life
In
the
every
thing,
sense,
every
yes.
sense. You see the immigrants on the one side that, would be the German people. One of our guys said, "That's my house that they use."
Oh, no.
Yeah, in the back. Over in the back, you also see, it would be Bishop John Newman. And you see remnants of New Orleans.
In their riverboat or something
Riverboat,
in it?
yes,
Yes.
yeah, for the travel.
And
So
he probably he may have come on a boat to
Yes.
come down here, as
Yeah,
well. But
yeah.
it does, because so oftentimes I know that was in 2000
Yeah.
that this occurred. And that is the official port. And it was actually painted by an Italian painter,
painter,
correct?
right.
Depicting it. Because oftentimes it's a photograph.
Yeah.
And I think there were 5 of them when he
believe
was
something, yeah,
beatified.
yeah.
And his was the only portrait, especially one, or painting, that depicted so many things
Things,
about
yes.
his character
Character,
and his
yeah,
life. So,
yeah.
and it's hanging in there.
It's
So
hanging in the shrine, yeah, and we have
our viewers will see
right,
it. Yes.
we have little holy cards of variations of it, but it's wonderful because it picks that out, especially for his work, say, among the immigrants. See the people. He was very much of a people person, so that's why.
And multi-ethnic groups.
Multi-ethnic,
being
exactly.
Here,
Yes, especially here, right? Yeah, but throughout his career, So it was wonderful in that regard. So, but people still come today and they pray at the shrine and have hope. We have a wonderful little one. They were just here last week. People had a little baby, and when the baby was born, it had the brain, with the water on the brain and stuff.
Hydrocephalic cephalic baby.
Right. But they came and prayed, and now got the right doctors and the whole thing, and we call him our little Selos.
Little miracles.
Because he's running around. He's about a year and a half, age appropriate.
That's great.
Which is not the big miracle, but
But little miracles every day, and
every
it's that
day,
hope
every day.
that's here with all of that.
Yes. Yeah,
I know,
yeah.
because I've come and prayed for
Yeah,
family
for
members
people,
too.
yeah.
And there's a mailing list, for a newsletter too,
We have
folks. So
we
you
do have a
can look into
newsletter and-
that as
yeah,
well.
right.
I'll have a great website
Okay.
also.
Yeah.
the newsletter and all the little testimonials, are only part of so much more that is here. Visitors, people come to New Orleans all the time. There is such a rich history in this part of the city. And there's a museum here about the life and the work of Blessed Selos. And so it's another museum to add to your list. But tell us a little bit about what's there, what that has to offer, to our viewers who come.
The main thing would be the shrine where his
We
bones
talked
are
about that.
interred, and it's very elaborate and very nice. And that's,
Beautiful.
people come and pray there, and usually it's very respectful, very quiet, But just as you come in, we have what we call the museum part of it, and you'll see his casket that he was buried in. And somebody said, well, he must have been pretty short. And I said, well, measure the casket. He was about 6 feet tall, which is surprising.
It's deceiving when you look at those caskets because they're not made like today's.
No,
That's all.
yeah. And his rosary, his prayer books, the different things, and even, I think, the cord, we would, in those days, what they call discipline that we did for, as an act of penance, So that's all there, Plus, my favorite spot is, what I like to watch is, because for kids, we have a Selos statue on a bench, sitting there. Sitting there, and people sit down next to him and talk to him.
But we do. We talk to saints. So
we do.
It's, you get a visual with that, but the same thing is what we're doing here.
Yes.
And then.
Then we also have what we call the Selos Welcome Center.
Okay.
And in there, we have a wonderful 8 minutes, only 8 minute video, which is a great introduction to his life. The Father Byron Miller, who was the previous director, did it. And
I knew him.
Yeah, and it's just very good. It's not very long, but it's an excellent introduction. Then we have a walk of life, and there's several instruments, time period type of a thing. Back in the corner, they have a thing of Selos, I don't know what you call those, dioramas, or type of a thing, where Selos bending over a sick bed,
Yeah.
But there's other things that relate to his life in the whole
And
thing.
the times.
And the times.
And the times that were going on there. If I remember correctly, there's a lot of write-ups to read. Not big write-ups, but I mean that explain what's going on and about his life and what he would have been doing in this area, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So it really paints a whole picture of him as opposed to, we're sitting here, we're talking about him, and you can go on the website and you can read about him. But the Welcome Center and the shrine really hit home because this man walked and talked these streets and was so holy, And with the shrine there where he is present right there.
Yes.
It's a different sense
Yeah,
altogether.
it gives you a feel for that time and era, I think, And somebody even, as a young man, he played the violin, but he gave that up when he became a religious. He said, when somebody donated a violin that came, not his, it wasn't one of his, but a violin that you say, oh, we forget about that. He actually did play the violin, as a young man. Yes, yeah. So.
Well, Father Harry, thank you for being with us today. I mean, this has been such a, I read about him all the time, but your enthusiasm and your knowledge of him and his life and the work that y'all do here is just amazing. And to be present in this magnificent church is really just a gift to even, I had forgotten how beautiful it was. So I thank you again for being our guest today. And folks, join us again for another episode of Roots of Faith.